Cheryl Crazy Bull has just entered a new stage in her life. She is currently Vice President of Administration at Santa Gliska University. Within 2 weeks, she will be switching roles to move into the community to work at the community level in micro business management. So she is making that movement, moving through a new door and moving into kind of the unknown. And so it's particularly exciting for her to be with us this morning because she has some reflections about the community and about higher education, and she'll be sharing those with us. Besides being a vice president and soon-to-be community activist, Cheryl is a mother. She has 3 teenage children. Cheryl is a student. She is working on a master's degree in leadership at South Dakota State University. Cheryl is a scholar. Cheryl is an award winner. Last year she won an award, a $50,000 award from the Landon Foundation in California for indigenous leadership. And that's incredible. And yes, I think we need to give her a round of applause for that. I've only known Cheryl for about 48 hours, but I can tell you she is a fine storyteller. And this morning we're going to hear from Cheryl, and then we're going to have a brief conversation between Cheryl and Parker, and then we're going to close our session with a conversation between the group and our keynoters. So help me welcome Cheryl Crazy Bull.
Thank you. I want to thank Barb for that nice introduction. I want you to know that leadership money is all gone. I'm driving a new Blazer and I'm having a really nice time with it. It's really a pleasure for me to be here with all of you who are in the classroom. Those people, some of you may be administrators who were formerly in the classroom and wish you were back in there. And to be able to share with you some reflections that I have about what it means to be a part of the community. Before I do that, I want to take a brief moment here to talk about the tribal colleges, because I know some of you may not be that familiar with them. I am currently leaving one of 31 tribal colleges that are located in the United States and Canada. And we have several representatives from these institutions here today. And I'd like to recognize them because what I'm going to share with you is formed partly by my experience with the tribal college movement. So as I name these institutions, I'd like their representatives to stand up so that all of you could recognize them for their participation in this event. Fort Berthold Community College, Fort Peck Community College, Little Hoop Community College, Nebraska Indian Community College, of course, Santa Gliska University. We came with many, many people and got recognized for being among the top 10. Stone Child College, Standing Rock College, and Turtle Mountain College. And I'd like to thank all these people for coming and joining us. Thank you. The tribal colleges are really institutions that are formed out of the community. Unlike many institutions, they are not started by a government. They were not started by any kind of special interest group like a religious group or anything like that. They were really started by people in the community, particularly elders. And so that has formed our relationships with our communities. I want to say also that what I'm going to share with you is also formed by my current experience of making this transition from working in a community tribal institution into being a community developer, something that I have always been involved in but wanted to be able to do full time. So some of what I'm going to share also comes from this transition, which is both a joyous one and a painful one. You know, to leave 15 years of my whole adult life practically from that institution, moving into the unknown, moving into a community organization. It's hard to say how that will evolve, although I'm excited about it. As I talk, I'm going to talk about what it means to be a community and what tribal people can bring to that discussion. and give you some suggestions on ways that I think that you might be able to serve that better in your classroom, in your own personal life, in your institutions. What I think a community is when we find a common ground, when we find a common thread that weaves through our relationships. I don't think that that's always a conscious thing. I think sometimes we can be a community without really consciously knowing that we are part of that community. And my hope is that it becomes more conscious, that we recognize in our lifetimes as we evolve the ability for us to make conscious choices about being a community. We've heard all over the last several hours, the last couple of days, that community is about relationships, it's about connections. So, you know, I think that we all agree that community is about that. I think community is about having a safe, truthful environment to be in. And if those of you who haven't ever read any of Scott Peck's work, ought to read his work. Scott Peck did a great deal of work on community making. And he says that many of us live in pseudo-communities. We pretend that we're in a community of people, but it's a community that we're often dishonest in, or we allow people to make blanket statements or pronouncements, and we don't ever say, well, that's not right for you to be saying that. So he says that we do that, and then when somebody comes in and says, well, you know, this isn't really a community here, and I want us to be one, then we have a lot of chaos and a lot of people who try to drag us back to the status quo and say, oh, well, you know, it was much better when we did it that way. We've been doing it that way all along. Let's not change. Let's not be different. And that's what you're experiencing as you try to move into the community or into being a community. You experience all those naysayers who say, well, you know, we've never done it that way before, and we don't want to start. But he also says that when you move then from that chaos into being a true community, you have a period of time when you are quiet. And then you can become a real community. And I liked it, and I got the opportunity to read some of Parker's work before coming up here. And he talks about the importance of solitude, and I know experiences that as a gift in his own personal life. And that is, I think, part of what Scott Peck is also saying, that there is a period of time when we must be silent, when we must be in solitude. Those aren't necessarily at the same time. But there is a period when we must do that, because then that's when the Spirit moves us into the community, when we're able to become that. And I want to encourage you, because I've felt that I benefited a great deal from the study of Scott Peck's work. The Lakota people, many of you may have attended the session here on Mitakuye Oyase, but for those of you who didn't, the Lakota people believe in one of our creation stories that we all are formed from the blood of Ea, which is the first creation. Ea gives of its blood to give all living things life, and to form the air and to form the water, both of things that we need. And Ea covers itself with Maka, or the earth, so that living things have a place to be. That philosophy permeates our way of thinking. It permeates our way of life, and it shows us that there is a community. It shows us that we live in a community where we're all connected with each other in some way, and that my action affects you, it ripples out and affects other people away from me. So we have that understanding in our community. When we were created, human beings, all of us, we were created at the same, in the same manner as all other living things. We were not created to have power over other living things. We were created to live peacefully, to interact with grace with other living things. We were not created to have dominion over them. And that is a teaching that is deeply embedded in our philosophy, and is different than from some of the other philosophies that people currently live with in this world. So as human beings, and I was thinking to myself, well, what is it that we bring then to the universe? You know, and we bring some powerful gifts that the animals and the plants also possess. We bring our emotions, we bring our intellect, we bring our physical strength, we bring our spirituality to this. We bring a power to either create life or to destroy it. And I think as human beings, we have had a hard time accepting that we have that kind of power. We have not learned how to live with that kind of power. And that is part of what we need to be able to do to be a community. To be a community of, regardless of the size, whether it's a small group or whether it's the entire world. I think we bring to this discussion of community as human beings the power, the ability to choose. And that's one of the things that I tell my friends, my colleagues, my children, that you always get to pick. You get to pick your behavior, you get to pick what you're going to say, you get to pick your reaction. And we have that, each of us here. We have the ability to choose in our classroom how we're going to be. We have the ability to choose in our relationships how we're going to be. I want to talk briefly about what I think tribal people bring to this discussion, because I think that that's part of the reason why I'm here, is to talk a little bit about what we might bring to this discussion of community. One time I heard Vine Deloria Jr., who many of you may know or may be aware of. He's a very well-known Lakota scholar. I heard him talking at a conference at about the time that there was a lot of discussion in the science community about whether or not animals could talk. There was the headlines in Time magazine and, probably at Newsweek, other magazines. There was a conference going on about it. And he got up in front of all of us tribal peoples and he said, if I got up in front of all of you and I asked you if animals could talk, you would laugh me out of the room, because we have always known that animals can talk, because we talk to animals. We know that you can do that. They say that you can learn Lakota by listening to the songs of the birds. That there is power in that. So we bring a way of knowing about relationships and of knowing the world that is different than what other cultures have. Not making any kind of judgment about the value of it or anything like that. We just bring a different way of knowing the world. And there is much to be learned from that. We also bring a different understanding of land and of place. That we believe that we are birthed out of this land that we are living on today, what we call America, what we call the United States, North and South America. We believe that we are birthed out of that, and we have spilled our blood for that land. We have spilled our blood in defense of it to protect it. And so this land is a sacred place to us. And it has been for many, many, many hundreds of years. So we bring that knowledge, to the discussion of what it means to be a community, because a community is also about the land. We bring our knowledge of the sacred. That many, many tribal peoples have all tribal peoples have a profound understanding of the sacred. They have a profound understanding of spirituality, the belief that God is in us and God is outside of us, that God is all of creation and God's blood is in us. And that is a profound understanding of the sacred that we can bring to this discussion of how we can live as a community, how we can be a community of people. We bring our knowledge of what it means to be prosperous and to have a good quality of life. For many years now, there has been a lot of struggle in tribal communities to create more viable economies. But on many reservations, we have had corporate attempts, for instance, to bring environmental waste into our communities, everything from low-level nuclear waste to mega dumps. And yet, despite the economic problems in our community, the real difficulties that we have, we refuse those things because we know that prosperity is not about those kinds of material goods. That prosperity is about our culture, it's about our traditions, it's about our land. And we want to be able to live a quality life, and we certainly need to be able to have that, but it is not about the accumulation of material goods. And I'll mention that a little bit later when I talk about the importance of giveaway to all of us as people. I think another thing that we bring is our knowledge of the power of words. We know and we are raised to believe in the importance of language, the importance of the words that you put out there in the universe, that we know that they have power in themselves. We also know that our native languages have tremendous power, that they are the root, the foundation of our philosophy, and that it is critical that we, all of us, keep those languages, whether they are indigenous or European languages, that we keep those languages dear to ourselves because they convey a philosophy about life that is different than English. English has its own power, and all of our traditions, all of the words that come out of our other languages have their own as well. We also bring our knowledge of the meaning of education, and I titled my talk about Woonspe. Woonspe is, one time I heard a gentleman named Siebert Youngbear, who is deceased now, who was a traditional singer and a traditional educator, talk about the meaning of Woonspe. And he said that it had 3 root words in Lakota, and that those 3 root words essentially meant that we were talking about a peaceful way of life that was a burden to carry. So then that we know as educators, as tribal peoples, that when you get an education, especially a formal education, you are getting a gift. You're getting something that has a responsibility with it. And if you look at those parts of that, you know, you talk about having peace, having contentment, having a balanced way of life. That's something that we all seek. You know, every living thing that seeks that kind of contentment. We talk about our way of life, you know, our rituals, our traditions, our culture, our relationships. And then we talk about that it's a burden to carry. That you have a responsibility when you have an education to open up the opportunities for those people who do not have a voice. You have a responsibility to do justice, to look to correct disparities, to create that kind of environment when you have an education for others to also attain some of that. And as formal education has really moved into our communities, into our tribal communities, you know, we have struggled with what that means to deliver a formal education in a society that education was a lifelong thing, and it was experiential, and it was done through telling, through storytelling, through practice, through all those kinds of things. When you get an education, we know that you are using an education to pass along your beliefs, your values, your culture, your traditions, your language. We know that that's the power of education. As any of you who are familiar with Indian education know that education was used, in fact, to take away the culture and the traditions of tribal peoples, to civilize us in the American way. And we resisted because we had those informal mechanisms in our families that protected our knowledge, our traditional knowledge. And now we are coming into the cycle of education, saying we're going to use formal education to revitalize our communities. So there is a terrible history associated with education in our communities that we are overcoming right now. We are dealing with that. Once I heard this story from a friend of mine, Ron Goodman, who had done a number of interviews with people about plants and healing practices associated with plants. And he talked about this old man who I knew when I was a child, Steve Eagleroad. When Steve was old, he said that when he was a young boy, his mother was a midwife, and he was called upon to often go with her when she went to deliver babies. And one night, he said, during a bad storm, he went with his mother to the home of a young woman who was having her first child, and she was having a difficult birth. And his mother told him, he was about 10 years old, his mother told him that he needed to go out and find this particular plant for her so that she could use it to help this young woman. And he was afraid to because the weather was bad and he was a child. He finally said that his mother told him, well, if you just go out, she said, and go out toward the west, she said, then the plant will show itself to you, and then you just bring it back to me. And so he gathered his courage, and he did. He went out to get that plant. And he said as he walked toward the west, he saw a light off a little ways in the distance, kind of a bluish light, and he walked over to it, and it was the plant coming up out of the snow. And he took the plant, and he took it back to his mother. And she said, well, you know, the spirit of that plant showed you the way. The spirit of that plant showed you how to do that. And she told him a story about how the earth, which is our grandmother, gives of her life. She does the ultimate giveaway. She gives of her life so that all of the living things that are on her can also live. And I thought about that in terms of us as educators, you know, that we are really called upon to give away our lives. That this is a part of that burden that Woenspe means, that we give away our lives in order to provide an education for others. I think that we need to be always focused on our children. You know, Lakota people believe that formal education is really a privilege, but we also recognize that children, we call them wakieja, which means that they are sacred beings. And we recognize that that is a spirit that has come to us in a human form, and that we have responsibilities to keep that child with us, to keep that spirit of that child with us. And we have lots of rituals and rites of passage and stuff through that child's development into adulthood so that they can develop all parts of themselves. They can develop their mental, their physical, their emotional, their spiritual selves, and they can do it all together. They can kind of move along all together to become a true man and a true woman. We have all those kinds of teachings that we can bring to this discussion about that, because many of the problems that our children have today are problems associated with having some stunted growth in one of those areas of development. Something that happens to them in that environment. I think that we recognize that the raising up of a person to adulthood should be a gentle process, and I know all of us are increasingly concerned about the level of violence in our communities. And we have to be able, as educators, to create a safe environment that models that there is not violence present in that community. I want to offer that I believe that students are the community. It's disturbing to me when I think that as educators, and we do that at SGU as well, that sometimes that we forget that we are the community, that we bring a prior knowledge of our community, our students, our children bring a prior knowledge to that classroom. And our work is to affirm that prior knowledge, to let the student and let ourselves be that community, that we already are that. And if we choose to isolate or separate ourselves from that, that is a choice that we are making, that refusal to acknowledge that we are the community. I think that educators, you know, all of us, I want to say we have that burden of inspiring an active mind and a passionate heart. You know, that's something that we do by choice in our classroom. I think we should encourage students to have an active mind that pursues social change, that pursues activism, that comes from their personal selves, that is communal in nature, that it's about making the world a better place, because that's what we're supposed to be doing as adults, is giving them some of that power, that knowledge that they can do that. And it's tough, I know, because of the political and social climate in the country, but we still have to make that as an individual commitment. And I think we should inspire a passionate heart, a heart that wants to make a difference, a heart that believes in humanity, believes in the earth. I think that if we do not do that, we should not be educators. You know, that we are taking on a great responsibility with that individual mind, that individual heart. I think that this is a moral and ethical imperative right now in this country, because people are dying even as we speak. Even as I stand here and talk to you, the economic disparities in this country are creating an environment where people are dying. And we need to be able, as educators, not to have complicity with that. That when Parker was talking about the complicity of higher education with the Third Reich, I thought, well, let's not have complicity with the death of our children. Let's not do that as educators. Let's say no. We're not going to do that. We're going to do something that's better. I think there certainly cannot be a community without justice. You know that in my heart, I know that there is a meaning to the word justice. That justice means that all of us have enough to live on. That justice means that all of us are restored to our traditions. They're restored to our family life. That justice means that we take responsibility for our actions, that we take responsibility for the future. I know that there is a meaning to justice and that you cannot have community without justice. And as educators, you know, we need to be able to define that, say that for ourselves. I want to talk for a few minutes about how we're going to do this, and then I'll invite Parker to come up here and we'll have a dialogue to talk about some of what you've heard. I think one of the things that we need to be sure that we do as individual educators is that we need to teach the truth. You know, when Parker was talking about the Jewish Holocaust, I thought about something that is very dear to the hearts of tribal people, and that is the Holocaust in this country, where millions of Native people were killed in a quest for land and economic prosperity. And that restitution has still not been made to tribal peoples for those losses. So I thought about that, you know, as something that's dear to me to be able to convey to you as something that I think you need to teach the truth about. Now, I don't know the solution. I have worked for years on conciliation issues, and I don't know the solution, but I do know the dialogue needs to be there, that without our collective minds, we will not name the truth, and we will not seek solutions. So we need to be able to do that. I think that you as an individual, each of us, we need to know our own values. And I'm always surprised at how many people don't take the time to think about what they believe in. You know, what do you believe in? You should be able to say that. And don't pretend to your students that you don't have any. When I go into a classroom with my students, I tell them exactly where I'm coming from. And I try to create that environment where they don't have to agree with me. But I don't want them to think that I don't have values, that I don't have a passion for whatever it is that we're talking about, an understanding of my own about it. And I think that you need to be able to do that. I think you need to be able to articulate the values of your institution, and if you like them, to support them, and if you don't like them, to work on getting them changed. Many of the tribal colleges specifically state certain tribal virtues or values that they support, and my own institution does the same. We say that we believe in Woksape, our wisdom. We believe in Wahuthaka, our bravery, Wawachintanka, our fortitude, and Wachagtognaka, generosity. We say that those are things that we represent, and so when we make a decision, we look at that decision from those virtues, from those kinds of values. And there are many other values of industriousness and all kinds of things that are present in our life, but we don't pretend that we don't have those values. I think you need to model a community in your classroom. You know, if you do it nowhere else, if you find that for whatever reason it's impossible or difficult or scary for you to do that in other kinds of ways, you need to do it in your classroom. You need to create that sense among your students that they are safe, that they are connected, that they are able to say what they need to say, they are able to get at the truth, whatever that might be, which is a lifelong, many lifelong journey for them and for all of us. But you need to model that in your classroom. If you can't model that in your classroom, then the rest of the community will never come to you. That's where it really begins. I think you need to be able to, as an educator, be able to affirm the individual identity and self-esteem, show respect for each person as an individual. That's one of the things that I always believe and value about Lakota spiritual life, is that we really uphold the integrity of the individual and say that the individual gets to be who they want to be, as long as it doesn't hurt the rest of our tribal society. They get to make those choices. We even offer people the opportunity to leave us if they feel like they cannot live with the choices that are being made in that community. I think that you need to define what I said earlier about justice, define what that means to you. I know, like I said, I know that justice means to me that people have opportunity, that people have enough resources to live, that people are able to have a voice in environments where they often did not have one. I think as educators, you know, we have to have faith in our ability to do the exceptional in today's society and to make the exceptional an everyday occurrence. And I know that in our hearts we want that. That's why we become teachers. Being a teacher is a gift that we are given, being able to do that, being able to work with others on that. And I know I've been doing a lot of spiritual study over the last several months, or actually for several years, but recently I've been thinking a lot about justice issues, and I looked around and I thought, well, there are probably many people here who come from a Christian or a Judaic tradition, and so I went back to one of the Bibles that I had, and I thought, well, what would I say to you that comes from that kind of teaching, that comes from that kind of tradition? And I found a quote, or it wasn't a quote, but I found something in Micah 6 that I thought was really powerful that I will close with. Micah was a prophet, and he said, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" He closes by saying, "He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." I think that that's a nice piece that we could use to help us in our work of building community. And I want to thank you and to invite Parker to come up and join me. And of course, now we get to sit down.
Thank you for the substance and the movement of what you said. And I think by way of response, I'd like to just say one thing and then ask you a question that will take me deeper into the importance of what I heard during your talk. The thing I'd like to say is that I think it's terribly important for all of us at a conference on pedagogy, on the improvement of teaching and learning, on opening the classroom, to understand how deeply pedagogy and epistemology are linked. How profound is the connection between ways of teaching and learning and what Cheryl was talking about as ways of knowing. I think it's a neglected subject because, again, partly of our obsession with technique. We always want to know how to do it. And yet, when we dig deep into the history of educational reform in this country, we can find the landscape dotted with dozens of efforts at pedagogical reform, at humanizing the classroom, at bringing people not only into issues of content but issues of ethics. And yet each of those experiments, the Tussman College at Berkeley, the Meiklejohn College at Wisconsin, the Great Books experiments, whatever they may have been, have eventually withered and died, and we have reverted to business as usual, these distancing motifs, these objectifications, these pretendings that the world we're talking about is not the one we live in. And I think the reason for that is that the underlying root system, our understanding of how we know, has not changed. It is as if the pedagogies have been grafted on to the old root system, and the graft has not taken. The flower has withered and died. What's exciting today is that we are being challenged by people like Cheryl and by the tribal colleges represented here and all the folks in the room who are teaching and learning from that tradition to claim a new root system for what we're doing, a new underground source of teaching and learning. The real importance, it seems to me, of the Native American story, as we've heard it this morning, the real importance of the feminist story that we have been hearing for some years now, the real importance of African American scholarship in a variety of disciplines, is not simply the new facts, new factual truths that we are being asked to speak and claim, but it is that each of those is a repository of an alternative way of knowing, and of a way of knowing that for me is truer than the objectivist model of attempting to gain control over the world as it is known without ever letting that world speak back and make a claim on your life. What moves me deeply about what I've heard from Cheryl this morning is how if you follow her concepts and her ideas as a knower, as a teacher, as a writer, as a thinker, you suddenly find yourself in living interaction with whatever it is you're studying, whatever it is you care about. And in a living interaction, that thing becomes filled with personhood and turns around and speaks a voice to you and makes a claim on your life. The German poet Rilke has a wonderful poem in which there is the line, "There is no place at all that is not looking at you. You must change your life." And I've often thought what a wonderful line it would be to carve over the doorways of all the disciplines. What if we studied so-called third world societies not in a way that just allow us to look at them and make critical judgments, but in a way that allows them to look back at us and make a claim on our life? What if we studied the natural world in a way that didn't just allow us to gain mastery and control, but in a way that allowed us to look back at us and make a claim on our lives? And that, it seems to me, is what the pedagogy that Cheryl is talking about and the pedagogy of the tribal colleges is all about, but always rooted in a radically reconceived way of knowing, which is what I want to draw our attention to. It's beyond technique. It's beyond methodology. It's about entering a new relationship with the communal reality in which we are embedded and of which we are part. The question that I am eager to ask you, Cheryl, is this. In doing these things, in attempting to claim these new old ways of teaching and learning, you experience the same thing that a lot of us in this room do, which is obstacles, institutional obstacles, economic obstacles, political obstacles. And yet I have to believe that the obstacles that you confront are higher and more powerful and more daunting than the obstacles that a lot of us confront. I come to this from a place of privilege, white, male, upper middle class, all the benefits. And yet I know the level of discouragement that I experience as I try to pursue an alternative vision of what higher education might be about. My question is, given the fact that the oppressive forces working against your vision are much stronger, I think, than the ones working against mine, what are your ongoing sources of hope and energy and personal revitalization of vocation that keep you at it?
I think that I would say two things. One is that a long time ago, and I think I see this in the entire community that I work in, that people are driven by their desire for a better life for children. You know, that there is in each one of us a relationship with a child that drives our decision making. That says, well, I think the best thing I can give to my tribal community is 3 decent children. You know, and I think that lots of people are saying that in the communities that I work in. A lot of people are saying, I want something better for my children. So I see that as one of the sources of strength. And I do see that in the tribal communities there was a very strained, somewhat oppressive conflict over religion. And I do see that there is a revitalization of traditional religious practices in our communities, and that those practices, which are about some of the things that you talk about, they're about prayer, they're about solitude, they're about silence, they're about communal worship in our tribal traditional ways, that those things are also a real source of strength for me personally and for the community. I also want to say a few words about leadership. You know, I think that if you want to really make a difference and you have a calling to any kind of leadership, then you should do it. I've learned that leadership is very risky. There have been times in my life when I felt actually physically threatened by a public position that I took, but I recognize that it's about giving away your life, and that you have to be able to do that. Not saying that each of you has to do that, but if you have a calling to do that, I encourage you to that. Until you are willing, I feel myself, until you are willing to spill your blood for your family and for your land, chances are you're going to have a difficult time changing this society. You know, and I see in more and more tribal people a willingness to do that, a willingness to make that kind of sacrifice for that. So I think it's a source of personal power.
To me, there's a very deep issue that's being named here that I'd like to raise to a highly conscious level, because I think we leave conferences like this with visions of possibility, but then this terrific sense of barriers in the road. And I guess the word I'd like to speak that has challenged me is that hope is sometimes more threatening than despair. And I see a tendency in the academic community especially, and I think it comes out of our intellectualizing tendency, to cling to what I've come to call the sweetness of despair. That hope is really very challenging. If you embrace hope, you really don't know what leadership you might be called to next, or how your life might, your reputation or your image might be threatened. I'd like to put that on a very personal level just for a moment. I was speaking with some people last night and was talking about my own journey through clinical depression at 2 different times in my 40s for prolonged periods of time, entering into a darkness that I think is, in our world, is not only personal, millions of people suffer from clinical depression, but is also societal and cultural and institutional. And I sometimes look around higher education and I say, what we've got is a real bad case of institutional clinical depression.
Prozac for everyone.
Yeah, right. Actually, my remarks were going in the other direction.
Sorry.
And one of the things I had to wrestle with during that time, and it was a very, very painful part of my wrestling, was the knowledge that there was a part of me that didn't want to get well, because when I was depressed, no one expected me to do things like this, which I find very daunting and full of surprises and things I may not know how to respond to or know how to handle. And I learned a lot from that experience. I learned that within me there is a shadow force that rejects hopefulness, even when somebody lays out a perfectly plausible plan of hope and offers to rally around it with me. And I think that personally and institutionally, if we care about this sort of change, we have to be very careful about the sweetness of despair.
That's one of the things that I do know, and I guess has been a driving force for me, is that I am constantly hopeful. And I also think that, and I hope my colleagues would say that, I really try to look for the best that people have to offer. That if there are times when they have a difficult time or I have a difficult time, I think that's okay. We should get by it, move on.
Maybe this is a good point to open to the larger community as our dialogue carries forward.
Our mic girls will get out here and...
I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
Question?
Here's a question here. Comment.
As you were talking about each of the trials in new ways of teaching and learning having kind of sunk at different times in history, I also was thinking that they have been battered. I mean, there have been forces that have been very much against them, and connecting back to what Cheryl said, that perhaps these are from people who fear justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, when Parker mentioned yesterday how much we live a culture of fear, you know, I agree completely, and I know it's hard to overcome it. I mean, I'm afraid to come up and talk about spirituality to a group full of public and private educators, but I thought, well, cast that aside and just get out there and do it. It takes a lot. That's why you need a community, though, because a community will let you do that. Right. Will let you overcome your fear.
Yeah. I think it has been battered. I think you're absolutely right, and it's often been by people who are resisting the claims of justice. But here's the little flip I'd like to make on that, just for the sake of walking around the point for a moment. Sometimes these highly objectified ways of teaching and learning are, they get clung to in the name of high academic virtue, namely some conception of objective truth, which this person deeply believes needs to be honored in the academy. And I think one of the things you have to do in social change is, for the longest time possible, you have to operate out of the goodwill that says, from the standpoint of that person's worldview, what he or she is doing may make total sense and may be claimed as high value. And my task is not to make enemy out of that person, but to find some way to enter the dialogue at a deeper level that would mutually transform our notion of what value and virtue is. I've met a lot of good faculty, deeply devoted to their work, who deeply believe that if they don't keep subjectivity out of the equation, truth is going to suffer. I happen to think they're wrong. I think truth suffers precisely when you keep subjectivity out of the equation. But I want to conduct that discourse at a level of mutual respect and understanding that allows there to be some progress on it, because I know good people who believe things that I don't believe. And I think part of community is finding those commonalities or potentialities for discourse that are deeper than our disagreements, and working them for all we're worth.
A couple of concepts have come out for me in this conference, and that is needs assessment versus asset assessments. And have you thought about what effect that would have on our institutions of higher education if indeed we shifted from a needs assessment to an assets assessment, and how we would behave in different ways?
I'll bet that's right down your alley, Cheryl.
Oh, yeah. I'm afraid that I couldn't comment on that with justice. You would probably be able to comment on it better for us.
I have just a quick thought about it. I think that I said yesterday at some point that higher education is a culture of judgment and critique. And I think that if I understand your language rightly, that's intimately linked with the business of always focusing on people's needs, on the gaps, on what they don't have, on what they don't understand, on what they don't know, rather than starting out with an affirmation of the knowledge they do have, which Cheryl mentioned this morning, the asset of insight and understanding, building on what's there and affirming it and celebrating it, so that you create a context in which it's possible to look at the gaps, to look at the needs, without a sense of inadequacy or judgment. So if I translate that language into pedagogy, I know, for example, the work of John McKnight in impoverished communities, where he's trying to help people go in not on the basis of what this community needs, but on the basis of all the strengths and gifts it possesses, and build a new community on that basis. I think we can do that in education as well. And I think many, many students suffer on a very regular basis from going into class after class after class where it feels like all they're learning is how stupid they are or how much they don't know, rather than having celebrated. I was so touched when the dean of the medical school, the story I told yesterday, said to me, these young people come to that circle on the first day of medical school not knowing much on one level, but knowing a great deal on another level. And when they start pooling what they do know, this person with sensate empirical skills, this person with intuitive relational skills, and start putting all that together, it's amazing what kind of diagnosis they can come up with sometime and how accurate it is. Does that relate to what you were wondering about?
The drive in the tribal community, is to get away from standardized kinds of assessment for that very reason. That we know people are gifted, knowledgeable about many other things other than what might appear on a standardized assessment.
Yeah.
One of the, maybe the major theme of this conference is building communities within our classrooms and building communities within our institutions, which I think is wonderful. But there's been a sort of sub-thread that perhaps I've been making up on my own, but that disturbs me a little. The sub-thread being that faculty and administrators and perhaps students don't now belong to communities, and we need to bring them in. And I think that's both false and misleading. Of course, humans insist on belonging to communities. If we don't belong to communities, we die. Part of the problem in higher ed is that we belong to lots of communities which maybe not be productive towards undergraduate education or may not help our institutions. And I think the trick is to bring faculty and administrators and perhaps students somewhat away from the communities of chemists or political scientists or economists or chancellors or vice chancellors or whatever communities students belong to, and help them join the community of the institution that is going to foster undergraduate education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cheryl, you said in your remarks we need to claim the fact that we are the community. Maybe could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I notice frequently is that many institutions will say, let's go out and find out what the community wants, and never ask themselves, because they live in that community, or never ask their students who come from that community what it is that they need. So I affirm that's really critical, I think, to our understanding of community.
I'd like to say one other thing about that, and here I may argue a little bit with Scott Peck, which I rather enjoy doing. I think that every human being belongs to multiple communities, and I think it's very dangerous to make what may feel like a totalitarian claim on a person's life about this is the community that you must give most attention to. I think in the modern world we have to look for modified versions of community, versions of community that don't make a total claim, but that make a rightful claim given the task that community is attempting to do. One of the problems I have with Peck's work is a tendency sometimes to reduce community to questions of interpersonal intimacy, what I have come to call share or die, which I object to very vigorously, because I think that intimacy, genuine intimacy, is something that I, at least, and this may just be my limitation, will enter into with a relatively small number of people in my life, and will not respond favorably if asked to enter into sort of forced intimacy with people I'm connected to simply on the basis of a common work or a common task. However, There is another form of community, for example, what I call a community of discourse about teaching and learning, that I believe I have a professional obligation to enter into if I am a teacher at an institution, and I believe the institution has every right to call me into that community. But that community has to be structured in ways that does not coerce anything, but that is highly invitational and rewarding enough in its own discourse that I will want to do more and more of it. And I think there's a kind of leadership that knows how to structure invitational community around shared professional tasks, because only in such a community can we get better at doing that task. There's another kind of leadership that tries to coerce community into being that is, I think, both a practical failure and a moral, sometimes, outrage